The scorching summer heat of 1878 had already claimed so much of Nogales, Arizona territory. But as Genevieve Osborne stood watching her family home collapse into glowing embers, she realized that the true devastation had only just begun. Flames still licked at what remained of the wooden frame house, sending plumes of black smoke into the clear blue sky, as if signaling to the world that another dream had been consumed by the unforgiving western frontier. Genevieve Genny, to those who knew her well, clutched her father's pocket watch in her trembling hand. It was one of the few possessions she'd managed to save, along with a weathered leather trunk containing her mother's wedding dress, a few family photographs, and the deed to the land. Her parents had been gone for 3 years now, both claimed by a fever that had swept through the territory, leaving their only daughter to manage the modest cattle ranch on her own. At 24, Genny had grown accustomed to the hardships of frontier life, but as she watched the last standing wall of her childhood home succumb to the fire, she felt her resolve beginning to crack. "Miss Osborne," a deep voice called from behind her. She turned to find Quentin Irving, a local cowboy who occasionally helped with the cattle drives, approaching on horseback. His usual confident demeanor seemed subdued as he surveyed the destruction. "Mr. Irving," she acknowledged, quickly wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. "I appreciate you coming, but as you can see, there's not much left to save." Quentin dismounted, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the scorched earth. Beneath the wide brim of his hat, his blue eyes were filled with concern. "I saw the smoke from town. What happened?" "Lightning," she replied, her voice hollow. "Hit during that brief storm this morning. I was checking the south fence line when it happened, by the time I got back." Her voice trailed off. Quentin nodded silently, understanding all too well how quickly disaster could strike in this untamed land. He'd been working ranches throughout the territory for the past 5 years, ever since he'd left his family's failing farm in Missouri at the age of 22. Now 27, he'd seen his share of tragedies, but something about Genny Osborne's quiet dignity in the face of such devastation stirred something deep within him. "You managed to save something at least," he noted, gesturing toward the trunk at her feet, "just some personal effects." "Nothing of real value," she said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. In this harsh land, memories were sometimes all a person had to hold on to. "Where will you go?" he asked, removing his hat and running a hand through his sun-bleached brown hair. Genny's green eyes surveyed what remained of her property. The barn still stood, along with the corral and water pump. Most importantly, her small herd of cattle had been grazing in the far pasture when the fire struck. "I suppose I'll sleep in the barn until I can rebuild," she said, more to herself than to him. "It wouldn't be the first time," Quentin frowned. "That won't do, Miss Osborne. The Wilkinsons have a spare room they rent out in town, at least until you can get back on your feet." "I can't leave the ranch," she protested. "Without the house, rustlers might think it's abandoned. I've worked too hard to keep this place going." Quentin knew she was right. Unattended property didn't stay unclaimed for long in the territory. "Then I'll stay too," he said, the words leaving his mouth before he'd fully considered them. Genny's eyes widened. "Mr. Irving, that's hardly proper. I'll sleep in the barn," he clarified quickly. "You can take my tent. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. I've been looking for steady work anyway, and you'll need help rebuilding." She studied him carefully. Quentin Irving had a reputation as a skilled ranch hand and an honest man, but she'd always kept her distance from the cowboys who passed through Nogales. After losing her parents, self-reliance had become her armor against further heartbreak. "I can't pay you much," she said finally. "We'll work something out," he replied, then bent down to grasp the handle of her trunk. As he lifted it, he looked her square in the eye. "We will recover, Miss Osborne. You have my word on that." There was something in his steady gaze that made Genny want to believe him, despite the despair threatening to overwhelm her. She nodded once, and together they turned away from the smoldering ruins, walking toward the barn and an uncertain future. That evening, Quentin helped Genny set up his canvas tent near the barn. The structure was simple but sturdy, with enough room for her bedroll and trunk. As darkness fell, they sat outside by a small campfire, the stars emerging one by one in the vast Arizona sky. "Thank you for the coffee," Quentin said, warming his hands on the tin cup. "Best I've had in a while." "My father always said that good coffee is essential, especially when everything else is falling apart," Genny replied, staring into the flames. The fire was controlled this time, comforting rather than destructive, but she couldn't help remembering how different flames had looked consuming her home just hours earlier. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she said softly. "He moved us here from St. Louis when I was just 12. Said he wanted to raise me somewhere with open skies and honest work." She smiled faintly at the memory. "My mother thought he'd lost his mind, bringing us to such a wild place, but she loved him enough to follow." Quentin nodded. "That's real love, I suppose. Following someone even when the path seems dangerous." "And you, Mr. Irving, what brought you to Nogales?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Just looking for work, mostly. Got tired of watching my family's farm wash away a little more each spring when the Missouri River flooded. My older brother took over what was left. I headed west." "And your family?" "Parents still back east, 2 brothers and a sister." He took another sip of coffee. "Write to them when I can, but I haven't been home in 5 years." They fell into companionable silence, the crackle of the fire and distant lowing of cattle the only sounds disturbing the night air. Eventually, Genny stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. "We should get some rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "Indeed it will," Quentin agreed, rising to his feet. "I'll check on the horses once more, then turn in. Good night, Mr. Irving." "Good night, Miss Osborne." He hesitated, then added, "And please call me Quentin." She considered this breach of formality for a moment, then offered a small smile. "Then you must call me Genevieve, or Genny if you prefer. Most people do." "Genny," he repeated, liking the way it sounded. "Sleep well." As Quentin made his way to the barn, he found himself wondering about the circumstances that had brought him here. He'd been planning to move on from Nogales, perhaps try his luck in Tombstone, where silver was drawing men by the hundreds. Instead, he was committing himself to rebuilding a stranger's home. Yet somehow it felt right. Inside the barn, he spread his bedroll on a pile of clean hay, removed his boots, and lay back with his hands behind his head. Through a gap in the wooden slats, he could see the stars, bright and eternal. He wondered if Genny was looking at those same stars from her tent, and the thought brought an unexpected warmth to his chest. Morning came with the first rays of sunlight slipping through the barn walls, rousing Quentin from a fitful sleep. He dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Genny already awake, tending to a small fire where a pot of coffee was brewing. "You're up early," he remarked, approaching cautiously, mindful of her privacy. She glanced up, her auburn hair catching the early light. "Couldn't sleep much," she admitted. "Too many thoughts. About the house, about everything." She poured him a cup of coffee and handed it to him. "I was thinking we should salvage what we can from the ruins first, then clear the site. There might be nails and fittings we can reuse." Quentin was impressed by her practical approach. "Good thinking. We should also take stock of what lumber we have. The barn looks solid, but we might be able to repurpose some of the wood from the coral for immediate needs." They spent the morning carefully picking through the charred remains of the house. Most of it was beyond saving, but they managed to recover some metal tools, a few pieces of cookware, and surprisingly, a small box containing family documents that had been protected by a fallen beam. Genny clutched the box to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought these were lost," she whispered. Quentin pretended not to notice her emotion, focusing instead on separating salvageable nails from the debris. He understood the need for dignity in grief. By midday, the Arizona sun was beating down relentlessly. They retreated to the shade of a large oak tree near the barn to eat a simple lunch of jerky and hardtack that Quentin had in his saddlebags. "We need to make a trip into town," Genny said, wiping sweat from her brow. "I should inform Sheriff Daniels about what happened, and we'll need supplies." "Agreed," Quentin replied. "I have some money saved. It's not much, but it should help with immediate needs." Genny's expression turned serious. "I won't accept charity, Mr. Irving Quentin. I can pay my own way." He held up his hands in surrender, not charity. Consider it an investment. When we get the ranch running properly again, you can repay me. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Very well, an investment with interest. I wouldn't expect anything less, he said with a smile. They rode into Nogales later that afternoon, Genny on her chestnut mare and Quentin on his sturdy bay gelding. The small frontier town was bustling with activity, miners heading to the saloon after a long day's work, merchants closing up their shops, and women hurrying to complete errands before nightfall. Their first stop was the sheriff's office, a modest adobe building on the main street. Sheriff Thomas Daniels, a grizzled veteran of the Civil War with a perpetually stern expression, listened gravely as Genny recounted the fire. "Lightning, you say?" he questioned, stroking his salt and pepper mustache. "Not the first property we've lost that way this summer. Though usually it's barns, not houses." His shrewd eyes shifted to Quentin. "Irving, didn't expect to see you still around these parts." "Just helping Miss Osborne get back on her feet," Quentin replied evenly. The sheriff's eyebrows rose slightly. "Is that so? Well, it's good of you. The Osborne place is a fine piece of land. Would be a shame to see it abandoned." There was something in his tone that made Quentin uneasy, but he couldn't place exactly what. After leaving the sheriff's office, they visited Henderson's general store. Martha Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes, rushed to embrace Genny when she heard about the fire. "Oh, you poor dear, what a terrible thing to happen," she exclaimed. "You must take some supplies on credit, I insist." "That's very kind, Mrs. Henderson, but I can pay," Genny replied firmly. "Nonsense," Martha said, lowering her voice. "Your mother was my dearest friend when she was alive. She would never forgive me if I didn't help her daughter in a time of need." Genny relented, accepting a basket of essentials: flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, beans, and some fresh vegetables from Martha's garden. Meanwhile, Quentin spoke with Mr. Henderson about lumber and building supplies. "I can have some wood delivered out to your place day after tomorrow," the shopkeeper offered. "Not as much as you'll need for a full house, mind you, but enough to get started on a shelter more substantial than a tent." "That would be greatly appreciated," Quentin said, shaking the man's hand. As they prepared to leave town, they were approached by Frederick Thornton, the local banker. He was a tall, thin man with small spectacles perched on his nose and a perpetual look of calculation in his eyes. "Miss Osborne," he called, hurrying across the street. "I've just heard about your misfortune from Sheriff Daniels. My sincere condolences." "Thank you, Mr. Thornton," Genny replied, her posture stiffening almost imperceptibly. "I hope you don't mind my asking, but have you given any thought to your situation? Rebuilding can be quite expensive, and running a ranch without proper facilities." He let the sentence hang. "I'm aware of the challenges," she said coolly. Of course. I merely wanted to remind you that my offer still stands. The Simmons brothers are very interested in expanding their operation, and they would pay a fair price for your land. More than fair, given the circumstances." Quentin watched as Genny's knuckles whitened around her horse's reins. "As I've told you before, Mr. Thornton, my father's ranch is not for sale, not to the Simmons brothers or anyone else." The banker sighed, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "I understand your attachment to the property, Miss Osborne, but sometimes practicality must prevail over sentiment. Should you change your mind, my door is always open." With a tip of his hat, he turned and walked back toward the bank. "Charming fellow," Quentin remarked dryly as they mounted their horses. "He's been trying to buy our land since my father died," Genny explained as they rode out of town. "The Simmons Ranch borders ours to the north, and they've been expanding aggressively. My property has the best water access for miles around, and now he thinks the fire might have weakened your resolve." "Precisely." Her jaw was set determinedly, "but my father built that ranch from nothing. I won't be the one to let it go." They rode in silence for a while, the setting sun casting long shadows across the desert landscape. Finally, Quentin spoke again. "You know, when I first came to Arizona Territory, I worked for the Simmons brothers for about 3 months." Genny looked at him in surprise. "You did," he nodded. "Didn't much care for how they did business or how they treated their hands. I left as soon as I could." "Is that why Sheriff Daniels seemed surprised to see you helping me?" Likely so. The Simmons have influence in these parts. People tend to choose sides. Genny considered this information carefully. And which side are you on, Quentin Irving? He met her gaze steadily. The side that believes a person has the right to what's rightfully theirs, Miss Osborne, nothing more, nothing less. Something shifted between them in that moment, a foundation of trust beginning to form amid the ashes of disaster. Back at the ranch, they unloaded their supplies and settled in for another night under the stars. As Genny prepared a simple stew over the campfire, Quentin sketched out plans for a temporary shelter on a scrap of paper. "It won't be fancy," he explained, showing her the drawing. "Just one room to start with a proper roof and walls. We can expand it as we go." Genny stirred the stew thoughtfully. "My father always wanted to build a larger house, had plans drawn up and everything, but never got around to it." "Do you still have those plans?" She nodded. "In the trunk. They're probably too ambitious for now, but maybe someday." "Maybe sooner than you think," Quentin said. "First things first, though, we need to get you a roof over your head before the weather turns." They ate their stew in companionable silence, the tension of the day gradually easing from their shoulders. Later, as Genny retired to her tent and Quentin to the barn, neither realized they were both thinking of the other, wondering about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. The next few days fell into a rhythm of hard work and gradual progress. They cleared the house site completely, stacking salvageable materials and disposing of the rest. Mr. Henderson arrived with the promised lumber, along with a surprise his son Jacob and 2 other young men from town, volunteering to help with the building. Martha insisted, he explained with a shrug, said it was the Christian thing to do. With the additional hands, the simple one-room shelter took shape quickly. By the end of the week, it had 4 walls, a roof, a door, and even a small window. It was crude by any standard, but to Genny it represented hope. "It's perfect," she declared when the men finished, her eyes shining with gratitude. Jacob Henderson shuffled his feet awkwardly. "It's not much of a house, Miss Osborne. It's a beginning," she replied firmly. "And I can't thank you all enough." That evening, after the volunteers had returned to town, Genny and Quentin moved her belongings into the new shelter. The single room was barely 10 feet square, but it offered protection from the elements and privacy that the tent had lacked. "It feels almost luxurious after a week in the tent," Genny remarked, arranging her bedroll on the wooden floor. Quentin leaned against the doorframe, admiring their handiwork. "It'll do for now. Tomorrow we can start thinking about proper furniture." "And the cattle," Genny added. "I've neglected them this past week. I should ride out and check the herd tomorrow." "I can do that while you settle in here," she shook her head firmly. "They're my responsibility. Besides, I could use the ride, been too cooped up with building." Quentin recognized the determination in her voice and didn't argue. "At least let me come with you. 2 sets of eyes are better than one." "Fair enough." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Quentin, for everything you've done." "Just keeping my word," he replied softly. "We're recovering, just like I said we would." The next morning dawned clear and cooler than previous days, a welcome respite from the relentless summer heat. They set out early, riding south toward the grazing lands where the cattle usually gathered around a natural spring. The landscape opened up before them, saguaro cacti standing like sentinels across the rolling terrain. In the distance, the Santa Rita Mountains rose majestically against the azure sky. Despite the hardships of frontier life, moments like these reminded Genny why her father had chosen this place. "It's beautiful country," Quentin remarked, as if reading her thoughts. "It is," she agreed. "Harsh sometimes, but beautiful in its own way." They rode in comfortable silence until they reached the spring. The cattle, about 30 head in total, were grazing peacefully nearby. Quentin noted with approval that they looked healthy and well-fed. "You've done a fine job with this herd," he commented. "Good stock." Genny nodded, pride evident in her expression. "My father was particular about breeding, said quality matters more than quantity." A wise philosophy. Quentin dismounted to check the water level in the spring. "Looks like the water's holding up well despite the dry spell." As they were preparing to head back, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. 3 riders appeared over a rise, heading directly toward them. Quentin instinctively moved closer to Genny, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. As the riders drew nearer, Genny recognized them. "Simmons' men," she murmured. The leader, a burly man with a thick mustache and hard eyes, reined his horse to a stop a few yards away. "Well, if it ain't Miss Osborne," he drawled. "And look here, boys, she's got Irving riding shotgun for her now." "Roland," Quentin acknowledged tersely. "What brings you to my land, Mr. Barton?" Genny asked, her voice calm but firm. Roland Barton, foreman of the Simmons Ranch, smiled unpleasantly. "Just being neighborly, madam. Heard about your misfortune with the fire. Mr. Simmons sent us to check if any of your cattle had wandered onto our range in the confusion." "As you can see, my herd is exactly where it should be," Genny replied. "So it seems." Barton's gaze shifted to Quentin. "Heard you were heading to Tombstone. Irving changed your mind for the time being," Barton snorted. "Playing hero to the damsel in distress, are we? How noble." His companions chuckled. "Mr. Simmons won't be pleased to hear you're mixing in his business." "Miss Osborne's ranch isn't Simmons' business," Quentin responded evenly. "Not yet," Barton agreed with a smirk, "but it's only a matter of time." "Smart money says she won't last another winter out here on her own." Genny straightened in her saddle. "You can tell Mr. Simmons that I appreciate his concern, but I'm not going anywhere." "Brave words, madam. Hope you don't come to regret them." Barton tipped his hat mockingly. "Good day to you both." The three riders wheeled their horses around and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. "Charming fellows," Genny remarked once they were out of earshot. Quentin's expression was grim. "Roland Barton is Simmons' dirty work man. If he's sniffing around your property, it's not a good sign." "Do you think they'd really try something?" He considered the question carefully. "The Simmons brothers usually get what they want one way or another, but they're also careful about appearing legitimate. They won't risk anything too obvious, like burning down a house," Genny asked quietly. Quentin looked at her sharply. "You think the fire wasn't caused by lightning?" She shrugged, uncertainty in her eyes. "I wasn't there when it started. Lightning seems likely enough, but the timing is convenient for them," he finished. "Have they approached you recently before the fire?" "Mr. Thornton came by about 2 weeks ago with another offer. I refused, of course." Quentin frowned thoughtfully. "Might be coincidence, might not be. Either way, we should be more vigilant." They rode back to the ranch in thoughtful silence, each contemplating the potential threat posed by their powerful neighbors. That evening, as they sat by the fire outside Genny's new shelter, Quentin finally voiced what had been on his mind all day. "I think I should stay on permanently," he said. "At least until we're sure the Simmons aren't planning anything." Genny looked up from the shirt she was mending. "I can't ask you to put your life on hold indefinitely, Quentin. You're not asking, I'm offering." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the night sky. "Besides, I've been drifting long enough. Might be nice to stay in one place for a while. As my hired hand." There was something in her tone he couldn't quite decipher. "As your partner," he corrected. "I've been thinking about it. You need help running this place, and I need somewhere to put down roots. We could split the profits once we get the ranch back on its feet." Genny set her mending aside, considering his proposal. "A partnership. A business arrangement," he clarified, though something in his chest tightened as he said it. "You provide the land and cattle, I provide the labor and some capital for rebuilding. We both benefit. And when you decide to move on, what then?" He met her gaze steadily. "We'd work that out when the time comes. I'd give you fair notice, make sure you're not left in the lurch." Genny was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, she looked up at him, her expression resolute. "All right, Mr. Irving, you have yourself a partner." They shook hands formally, but both felt the significance of the moment, their futures now intertwined in ways neither had anticipated when Quentin had first ridden up to the burning homestead just over a week ago. The following weeks brought steady progress to the Osborne ranch. With Quentin's carpentry skills and Genny's practical knowledge of the property, they expanded the small shelter into a modest 2-room cabin. They added a proper stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 2 chairs, and even a small bookshelf where Genny proudly displayed the few books that had been saved in her trunk. Their partnership quickly fell into a natural rhythm. Quentin handled most of the heavy labor repairing fences, managing the livestock, and continuing work on the cabin. Genny maintained the household, tended a small vegetable garden she'd started, and kept meticulous records of their expenses and the ranch's assets. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, planning the next day's work or simply enjoying each other's company. Sometimes Genny would read aloud from one of her books, her voice bringing the words to life in a way that made Quentin, who had limited formal education, eager to hear more. As September gave way to October, the desert heat began to subside, and the landscape transformed with the changing season. The first cool morning found Genny wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she stepped outside to greet the day. Quentin was already up, splitting wood near the corral. He paused, axe in hand, when he saw her. "Morning," he called. "Coffee's ready by the fire." She smiled gratefully, moving toward the small campfire they still maintained outside for cooking. "You're up early. Thought I'd get a head start. Wanted to finish that east fence line today." Genny poured herself a cup of coffee and sat on a stump they'd repurposed as a seat. "I was thinking of riding into town later. We're running low on supplies, and I need to post a letter to my mother's cousin in Tucson." Quentin nodded, resuming his wood splitting. "I'll come with you." "Need to speak with Henderson about getting some glass for the windows before winter sets in." As Genny watched him work, she realized how seamlessly he had integrated himself into her life. What had begun as an act of kindness during a crisis had evolved into something else entirely, a partnership that went beyond their formal agreement. There was a comfort in his presence, a sense of security she hadn't felt since her parents were alive. Later that morning, they rode into Nogales together. The town was hosting a small harvest festival with vendors selling produce and handcrafted goods along the main street. The festive atmosphere was a welcome change from their daily routine. After completing their errands, they lingered in town, sampling roasted corn and apple cider from the festival stalls. For the first time since the fire, Genny felt truly relaxed, almost happy. "Miss Osborne," a voice called out. They turned to see Martha Henderson hurrying toward them, her round face flushed with excitement. "And Mr. Irving, I'm so glad I caught you. We're having a dance tonight at the town hall. Nothing fancy, just a little celebration for the harvest. You simply must come." Genny hesitated. "Oh, I don't know, Mrs. Henderson. We have so much work at the ranch." "Nonsense," Martha interrupted. "Everyone needs a night of enjoyment now and then, especially after what you've been through. Say you'll come, both of you." Quentin glanced at Genny, leaving the decision to her. "Well," Genny said slowly, "I suppose one evening wouldn't hurt." "Wonderful," Martha clapped her hands together. "It starts at 7. Oh, and Genny dear, I have a dress that might fit you if you didn't save one from the fire." "That's very kind, but I managed to save my mother's blue dress." "I believe it will be suitable." After Martha bustled away, Quentin turned to Genny with a raised eyebrow. "A dance, huh? Didn't take you for the dancing type." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Mr. Irving," she replied with unexpected playfulness. "I'll have you know I was quite accomplished at dancing back in St. Louis." "Is that so?" he grinned. "Well, I suppose I'll have to see for myself tonight." They returned to the ranch to prepare for the evening. Quentin had a clean shirt and vest in his saddlebags that he'd been saving for special occasions. Genny retrieved her mother's blue dress from the trunk, smoothing out the wrinkles as best she could. The dress was a simple design of sky blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It had been her mother's second-best dress, kept for church and social gatherings. As Genny slipped it on, memories of her mother flooded back, her gentle hands adjusting the collar, her voice humming softly as she brushed Genny's hair. When she emerged from the cabin, Quentin was waiting by the horses, dressed in his clean shirt with his hair slicked back with water. He stared at her for a moment, clearly taken aback by her transformation. "You look." He began, then cleared his throat. "That is, the dress suits you." Genny felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Irving." The ride to town was filled with an unfamiliar tension, a heightened awareness of each other that hadn't been there before. By the time they reached the town hall, the dance was already in full swing. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played lively tunes while couples twirled across the wooden floor. Martha Henderson immediately descended upon them, pulling Genny into a tight embrace. "You look absolutely lovely, my dear. That dress is perfect on you." She turned to Quentin. "And don't you look handsome, Mr. Irving? Now, you two enjoy yourselves. There's punch and refreshments at the back." As Martha bustled away to greet other arrivals, Genny and Quentin stood awkwardly at the edge of the dance floor. "Would you like something to drink?" Quentin asked finally. "Yes, that would be nice." He returned moments later with 2 cups of punch, handing one to Genny. They sipped in silence, watching the dancers. "So," Quentin said at last, "are you going to show me these accomplished dancing skills of yours, or was that just talk?" Genny smiled despite herself. "Are you asking me to dance, Mr. Irving?" "I believe I am, Miss Osborne." He set down his cup and extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. The band was playing a waltz, and as Quentin's hand settled respectfully at her waist, Genny was surprised to find that he moved with unexpected grace for a man who spent his days on horseback and wielding an axe. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Irving," she remarked as he guided her through a turn. "Where did a cowboy learn to waltz?" "My mother insisted all her sons learn proper dancing, said it was the mark of a gentleman regardless of profession." His eyes crinkled with amusement. "My brothers and I complained bitterly, but she was adamant. Smart woman, she is indeed." His expression softened. "She'd like you, I think." The comment, so casual yet intimate, caught Genny off guard. Before she could respond, the music ended and they stepped apart, both slightly breathless. "Thank you for the dance," she said formally, trying to regain her composure. "The pleasure was mine." They danced twice more that evening, but also socialized with the townspeople, many of whom were eager to hear about the progress on the ranch. Several of the men who had helped build the shelter clapped Quentin on the back, treating him as one of their own rather than the drifter he had been just weeks before. It was nearly midnight when they finally headed back to the ranch, the moon lighting their way across the desert landscape. Genny felt a curious lightness in her heart, a happiness she hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you for accompanying me tonight," she said as they approached the ranch. "It was good to forget our troubles for a while." "It was," Quentin agreed. Then, after a pause, "You're a fine dancer, Genny Osborne." "As are you, Quentin Irving." They reached the cabin and dismounted, leading their horses to the corral. After settling the animals for the night, they stood facing each other in the moonlight, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Well," Quentin said finally, "we should get some rest. Plenty of work waiting for us tomorrow." "Yes, of course." Genny hesitated, then impulsively stood on tiptoe and kissed his cheek. "Good night, Quentin." Before he could respond, she turned and hurried into the cabin, leaving him standing in the yard, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been. Inside, Genny leaned against the closed door, her heart racing. What had possessed her to do such a thing? And yet, she couldn't bring herself to regret it. Something had shifted between them tonight, opening up possibilities she had never allowed herself to consider before. The next morning brought a return to their usual routine, though there was a new awareness between them, subtle glances and small smiles exchanged as they went about their tasks. Neither mentioned the kiss, but it lingered in the air like a promise. As October progressed, they worked diligently to prepare the ranch for winter. Though snow was rare in this part of Arizona territory, the temperature could still drop considerably, and strong winds often swept across the desert landscape. One afternoon, as Quentin was securing the roof of the small barn they'd constructed to replace the aging structure, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught his attention. Shading his eyes against the sun, he made out a rider approaching at a gallop. "Genny," he called down to where she was sorting through seeds for next year's garden. "Someone's coming, fast." She stood, wiping her hands on her apron, and moved to stand beside the ladder. As the rider drew closer, Quentin recognized Jacob Henderson, the shopkeeper's son. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Quickly descending the ladder, Jacob reined his horse to a stop in a spray of dust, his young face flushed with exertion. "Miss Osborne, Mr. Irving, thank heavens you're both here." "What is it, Jacob?" Genny asked, concern etching her features. "It's the Simmons brothers," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. They're claiming your water rights. They've filed papers with the territorial court saying the spring on your property belongs to them. Quentin and Genny exchanged alarmed glances. Without the spring, the ranch would be virtually worthless, unable to support cattle or crops. On what grounds? Quentin demanded. They're saying your father never properly registered the water rights when he claimed the land, Jacob explained. That it was an oversight in the paperwork. My pa says it's nonsense, but they've got some fancy lawyer from Tucson backing their claim. Jenny's face had gone pale. When is this being decided? Hearings set for 2 weeks from now in the county seat. Pa thought you should know right away so you can prepare. Thank you, Jacob, Quentin said grimly. We appreciate the warning. After Jacob departed, Genny sat heavily on a nearby stump, her expression stunned. Without that water, I know. Quentin knelt beside her, taking her hands in his, but we're not going to let them take it. Do you have your father's original land grant? Any paperwork about the property? She nodded slowly. In the trunk. Everything that was saved from the fire. Good. Tonight we'll go through it all, see what we're dealing with. That evening, they spread the documents across their small table, examining each one carefully. Jenny's father had been meticulous in his record-keeping, and they found the original land grant clearly stating that the property included all water rights to the natural spring located in the southeast quarter of the parcel. This seems pretty clear to me, Quentin said, tapping the document. But I'm no lawyer, Genny frowned thoughtfully. We need legal advice. Judge Patterson in the county seat might help, but I don't know if we can trust him to be impartial. The Simmons have friends everywhere. What about that lawyer in Tucson your mother's cousin mentioned in her last letter? The one who helped with her husband's estate, Mr. Abernathy. Yes, that might be our best option. Jenny's determination was returning. I could leave for Tucson tomorrow. We'll both go, Quentin said firmly. I'm not letting you face this alone. The journey to Tucson took 2 days of hard riding. The territorial capital was considerably larger than Nogales, with proper streets, substantial buildings, and a bustling commerce that spoke of growing prosperity. They found Lawrence Abernathy's office on Congress Street, a modest but well-maintained establishment with a polished brass plaque by the door. The lawyer himself was a surprisingly young man with intelligent eyes and a thoughtful demeanor. Miss Osborne, he greeted Genny warmly after she introduced herself. Your cousin spoke highly of you in her letters. I'm sorry to hear about your troubles. After they explained the situation, Abernathy studied the documents they had brought, his expression growing increasingly confident. The Simmons brothers don't have a legal leg to stand on, he declared finally. Your father's paperwork is in perfect order. The water rights are explicitly included in the land grant. Then why are they pursuing this? Genny asked. Abernathy's expression turned grim. Because they're counting on the fact that you're a woman alone, recently suffered a catastrophe, and might not have the resources to fight them properly. They hope you'll give up or sell out rather than contest their claim. She's not alone, Quentin interjected firmly. The lawyer gave him an appraising look. No, it appears she isn't. That improves your position considerably. The Simmons brothers prey on the vulnerable, but they're cautious about picking fights they might lose publicly. Will you represent us at the hearing? Genny asked. I'd be honored to, Miss Osborne, and I have a personal interest in seeing the Simmons brothers thwarted. They've been using these tactics throughout the territory for years. It's time someone stood up to them successfully. They spent the rest of the day discussing strategy and preparing for the hearing. That night, they stayed at a small hotel near the lawyer's office, taking separate rooms as propriety demanded. Genny found it difficult to sleep, her mind racing with worries about the upcoming legal battle. Around midnight, a soft knock at her door startled her. She rose, wrapping a shawl around her nightdress, and called out, "Who is it?" "It's me," Quentin's voice replied softly. She opened the door a crack, conscious of her state of undress and the impropriety of the situation. Is something wrong? No, He looked uncomfortable, standing in the dim hallway in his shirt sleeves. I wanted to make sure you were all right. You seemed troubled at dinner. The genuine concern in his eyes touched her deeply. I'm worried, she admitted. Even with Mr. Abernathy's help, the Simmons brothers are powerful enemies to make. We'll face them together, he promised. Whatever comes next, the simple declaration, spoken with such quiet conviction, eased some of the tension in her chest. "Thank you, Quentin." He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded. "Try to get some rest. Good night, Genny." "Good night." As she closed the door and returned to bed, Genny realized that despite the uncertainties ahead, she was no longer afraid. With Quentin at her side, she felt capable of facing whatever challenges came their way. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, a modest but imposing structure that represented the growing influence of law and order in the territory. Genny and Quentin sat beside Lawrence Abernathy at one table, while the Simmons brothers Victor and Elias sat with their lawyer at another. Victor Simmons, the elder brother, was a large man with a florid face and calculating eyes. Elias was slimmer, with a deceptively mild manner that masked a ruthless nature. Both wore expensive suits, clearly intending to impress the judge with their prosperity and standing. Judge William Patterson, a stern-faced man in his 60s with bushy white sideburns, presided over the proceedings. He began by outlining the case, his tone neutral but authoritative. "We are here to determine the rightful ownership of water rights to the natural spring located on what is currently known as the Osborne property," he stated. The Simmons brothers claim these rights were never properly registered to Jonathan Osborne when he acquired the land in 1866, and therefore remain separate from the land itself. The Simmons lawyer, a slick-talking man named Harrington, presented their case first. He argued that a technical error in the original filing meant the water rights had never been legally transferred, and that his clients had historical claim to all water sources in that region dating back to their father's first settlement in the area. When it was Abernathy's turn, he calmly demolished these arguments point by point. He presented Genny's father's original land grant, along with subsequent tax records that clearly included the water rights. Most damaging to the Simmons case, he produced a letter from the Territorial Land Office confirming that Jonathan Osborne had indeed filed all necessary paperwork correctly. "Your Honor," Abernathy concluded, "this case is not about a clerical error or a legal technicality. It is about two powerful men attempting to bully a young woman off her rightfully owned property by depriving her of its most valuable resource. The court must not allow such tactics to succeed." Victor Simmons' face had grown increasingly red throughout Abernathy's presentation. As the lawyer sat down, Simmons leaned over to whisper furiously to his own attorney. Judge Patterson called a brief recess to consider the evidence. When he returned to the bench, his expression was grave. "Having reviewed all documents presented, I find no merit in the claim brought by Victor and Elias Simmons," he declared. The water rights to the spring in question were clearly and legally granted to Jonathan Osborne as part of his land claim and have subsequently passed to his daughter, Genevieve Osborne, upon his death. The petition is denied. Genny sagged in relief while Quentin squeezed her hand under the table. Abernathy looked quietly satisfied. The Simmons brothers, however, were far from accepting defeat gracefully. Victor rose to his feet, his face contorted with anger. "This is an outrage," he bellowed. "Patterson, you know damn well." "Sit down, Mr. Simmons," the judge interrupted coldly. "Unless you wish to be held in contempt of court." Victor subsided, but the look he cast toward Genny and Quentin was venomous. "This isn't over," he muttered just loudly enough for them to hear as he passed their table on the way out. Outside the courthouse, Abernathy shook their hands warmly. "A clear victory," he said. "And an important one. The Simmons brothers aren't accustomed to losing." "Which makes them dangerous," Quentin noted grimly. "Indeed, I would advise vigilance in the coming weeks. Men like that don't take defeat well." They thanked the lawyer profusely for his help, settling his modest fee before preparing for the journey back to Nogales. As they rode away from Tucson, Genny felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at their legal victory, apprehension about the Simmons brothers' potential retaliation, and a growing certainty about her feelings for the man riding beside her. "We did it," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Quentin smiled, the tension of the past few days easing from his shoulders. "You did it, Genny. Your father would be proud." We did it together, she insisted. I couldn't have faced this alone. His eyes met hers, warm with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. You're stronger than you know, Genny Osborne, but I'm glad I could stand with you nonetheless. They made camp that night beside a small creek, building a fire to ward off the increasing chill of the November air. As they sat side by side, watching the flames dance against the darkening sky, Genny found herself studying Quentin's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, catching her gaze. "The future," she replied honestly. "What happens now? We keep building," he said simply. "Finish the house before winter sets in properly, look after the cattle, maybe increase the herd come spring. Is that what you want, Quentin, to stay on as my partner running the ranch?" He was silent for a long moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he turned to face her fully. "That depends," he said, his voice low and serious. "On what? On whether you might consider a different kind of partnership altogether." Her heart began to race. "What kind did you have in mind?" Instead of answering immediately, Quentin reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they enveloped hers. "I never expected to find a home when I rode into Nogales," he said softly. "I was just passing through like I'd been doing for years. And then I saw the smoke from your house and something changed." Genny held her breath, afraid to interrupt whatever he was trying to say. "These past months, working beside you, seeing your strength and determination, it's made me want things I never thought I would. A permanent home. A purpose, a future with someone who makes me want to be a better man." His eyes held her steadily. "I love you, Genny Osborne, and if you'll have me, I'd like to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife someday." Tears sprang to Genny's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "Oh, Quentin," she whispered. "I love you too. I think I have for quite some time now." His face lit up with a smile more radiant than any she had seen before. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers, a gentle, questioning kiss that quickly deepened as she responded eagerly. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes to my courtship then?" he asked, a hint of teasing in his voice. "Yes," she replied, laughing softly. "Though I think we've been courting in all but name these past months, don't you?" "Perhaps we have," he agreed, "but I'd like to do things right. You deserve nothing less." They returned to the ranch the following day, their triumph in court now accompanied by the private joy of their newly acknowledged feelings. The world seemed brighter somehow, full of promise despite the challenges that still lay ahead. Their first concern was completing the cabin before the heart of winter arrived. With renewed energy, they worked together to add the finishing touches: glass for the windows, proper doors with sturdy locks, and a small covered porch that Quentin insisted would be perfect for sitting together on summer evenings. Word of their victory over the Simmons brothers spread quickly through Nogales. Many of the townspeople, who had long resented the brothers' aggressive business practices, stopped by the ranch to offer congratulations. Martha Henderson brought a quilt as a housewarming gift, while her husband donated lumber for shelves and cupboards. Even Sheriff Daniels paid them a visit, his usual stern demeanor softened slightly. "Heard you bested the Simmons in court," he remarked, accepting a cup of coffee from Genny. "Can't say I'm sorry to see those two taken down a peg. We're just protecting what's rightfully ours," Genny replied diplomatically. The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. "Just be careful. Those boys don't forget a slight, and they've got long memories." He glanced at Quentin. "Good thing you decided to stay on, Irving. Miss Osborne could use a man with your experience around the place." There was something knowing in his tone that made Genny wonder just how much the sheriff had guessed about their relationship, but his words also carried a warning they both heeded. Despite their victory, the threat from the Simmons brothers remained very real. They took precautions. Quentin taught Genny to shoot with greater accuracy, they kept the cabin doors locked at night, and they took turns keeping watch when one of them had to leave the property. But they refused to live in fear, continuing their work and making plans for the ranch's future. As December arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and occasional light frosts to the desert landscape, They celebrated their first Christmas together in the cozy cabin. They exchanged modest gifts, a new hat for Quentin that Genny had ordered from Tucson, and for her, a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a rose that Quentin had saved for weeks to purchase. "It's beautiful," she gasped as he pinned it to her dress. "Not half as beautiful as the woman wearing it," he replied, his eyes warm with affection. They shared a simple Christmas dinner, but to Genny, it felt like a feast. For the first time since her parents' deaths, the holiday wasn't marked by loneliness and grief, but by warmth and hope for the future. Later that evening, as they sat together by the fireplace, Quentin suddenly stood and went to his coat hanging by the door. He returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I have one more gift for you," he said, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Genny unwrapped it carefully to find a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate patterns of leaves and flowers. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a simple gold ring with a single small pearl. "It was my grandmother's," Quentin explained softly. "My mother gave it to me before I left Missouri, said I should save it for the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Genny's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Quentin," he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Genevieve Osborne, these past months have been the happiest of my life. I came to Arizona Territory looking for something, though I didn't know what it was until I found you. You're the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want nothing more than to build a life with you." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Tears of joy spilled down Genny's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Quentin Irving." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet, pulling her into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, then increasingly passionate, filled with promises for their future together. When they finally drew apart, both breathless and flushed, Quentin pressed his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. "Spring," she decided. "When the desert blooms, we'll be married right here on the land my father loved. Nothing would make me happier." The winter months passed in a blur of work and planning. They announced their engagement to the townspeople, who responded with enthusiastic congratulations. Martha Henderson immediately appointed herself unofficial wedding planner, while her husband offered to build them a proper marriage bed as a wedding gift. As February turned to March, the desert began its annual transformation, wildflowers blossoming across the landscape in a riot of colors. They set their wedding date for early April, when the cacti would be in bloom and the weather perfect for an outdoor celebration. One crisp March morning, as Genny was gathering eggs from the small chicken coop they'd built, she heard the sound of approaching riders. Looking up, she was surprised to see Sheriff Daniels accompanied by 2 deputies. "Morning, Miss Osborne," the sheriff called, tipping his hat. "Is Irving about?" "He's checking the north fence line, should be back soon." She set down her basket of eggs. "Is something wrong, Sheriff?" Before he could answer, Quentin rode into view, quickly dismounting when he spotted the visitors. "Sheriff," he greeted cautiously, "what brings you out our way?" Daniels dismounted, his expression grave. "Got some news you both should hear. Victor Simmons was found dead yesterday at his ranch," Genny gasped. "Dead? How?" "Shot. Looks like he surprised a burglar in his study. His brother Elias is beside himself, swearing vengeance on whoever did it." The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly. "Thing is, whoever killed him didn't take much, just some papers from Victor's desk, and word is those papers had to do with water rights in this part of the territory." Quentin stepped closer to Genny, his face hard. "Are you suggesting what I think you are, Sheriff?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Irving. Just letting you know that Elias Simmons is making some pretty wild accusations, and I'd hate to see either of you caught in the crossfire of his grief." "We haven't left the ranch in 3 days," Genny said firmly, "and neither of us had any reason to harm Victor Simmons. The water rights issue was settled in court." Sheriff Daniels nodded slowly. "I believe you, Miss Osborne. But Elias is looking for someone to blame, and you two are at the top of his list. I'd advise caution in the coming weeks." After the sheriff and his deputies departed, Quentin and Genny retreated to the cabin to discuss this troubling development. "You think it was really a burglary?" Genny asked, pacing the small room. Quentin leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. Could be. The Simmons brothers had plenty of enemies, but the timing is suspicious, especially with those papers being taken. What should we do? Stay alert. Don't go anywhere alone. And maybe we should postpone the wedding just until this blows over. Genny stopped pacing, her expression resolute. No, I won't let Elias Simmons dictate our lives or our happiness. If we postpone now, who knows what might happen next to delay us further. We're getting married in April, as planned. Quentin smiled despite the gravity of the situation. Have I mentioned lately how much I love your determination? You could stand to mention it more often, she replied, moving into his arms. He held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair. We'll be careful, but we'll also live our lives. You're right about that. The weeks leading up to the wedding were tense but uneventful. There was no sign of Elias Simmons or his men, and gradually they began to relax their vigilance. The wedding preparations continued, with Martha Henderson and several other women from town helping Genny refurbish her mother's wedding dress for the occasion. April arrived, bringing with it perfect weather for an outdoor ceremony. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and mild, the desert around the ranch alive with blooming cacti and wildflowers. Genny dressed in her mother's wedding dress, now altered to fit her perfectly, while Martha helped arrange her hair with sprigs of desert flowers. When she looked in the small mirror they had installed in the cabin, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the grief-stricken, exhausted woman who had watched her home burn months ago, replaced by a radiant bride with hope shining in her eyes. The ceremony was to be held at noon near the large oak tree beside the cabin. Sheriff Daniels, who was also a justice of the peace, had agreed to officiate. As the guests began to arrive, nearly everyone from Nogales who could make the journey, Genny waited inside the cabin, her heart racing with anticipation. A soft knock at the door revealed Jacob Henderson, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "Miss Osborne, it's almost time. My ma sent me to check if you're ready." "I'm ready," she confirmed, gathering her simple bouquet of wildflowers. As Jacob escorted her outside, Genny was overwhelmed by the sight that greeted her. Their modest ranch had been transformed with ribbons, flowers, and a large canopy where tables had been set up for the celebration to follow. But most striking of all was Quentin, standing beneath the oak tree, dressed in a new suit, his face lighting up with love as he caught sight of her. She walked toward him slowly, savoring each moment. When she reached his side, he took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," he whispered. Sheriff Daniels cleared his throat. "Friends and neighbors, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Quentin Irving and Genevieve Osborne in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged vows they had written themselves, promising to face life's challenges together, to support and cherish each other through whatever the frontier might throw their way. When Sheriff Daniels finally pronounced them husband and wife, Quentin pulled Genny into a kiss that drew cheers and applause from their guests. As they turned to face the crowd as Mr. and Mrs. Irving, Genny felt a sense of completion, as if the final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. The celebration that followed was joyous, abundant food contributed by the townspeople, music provided by a local fiddler, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the desert landscape, Quentin drew Genny aside for a moment of privacy. "Happy, Mrs. Irving?" he asked, his arms circling her waist. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "It's strange to think that if my house hadn't burned down, we might never have found each other." "I like to think we would have, one way or another," he said softly. "Some things are just meant to be." As their guests departed and twilight deepened into night, Genny and Quentin retired to their cabin, now truly their home in every sense. Later, as they lay together in the marriage bed Henderson had crafted for them, Genny traced the lines of Quentin's face with gentle fingers. "I love you," she whispered. "Whatever happens, whatever challenges we face, I'll never regret choosing this life with you." "Nor I with you," he replied, pulling her closer. "We've already weathered fire and adversity. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." The following morning, they awoke to the sound of approaching horses, many horses. Quentin was instantly alert, reaching for the rifle he kept beside the bed. "Stay inside," he instructed Genny as he pulled on his trousers and shirt. "Not a chance," she replied, already dressing quickly. "Whatever this is, we face it together, remember?" They emerged from the cabin to find Elias Simmons and half a dozen of his men riding into the yard. Quentin positioned himself slightly in front of Genny, his rifle held ready but not aimed directly at the visitors. "Simmons," he acknowledged coldly, "this is private property." Elias reined his horse to a stop, his gaunt face impassive as he surveyed the ranch. Unlike his more volatile brother, Elias had always been the calculating one, controlling his emotions with iron discipline. "Irving, Mrs. Irving," he corrected himself, noting their proximity. "I hear congratulations are in order. What do you want, Simmons?" Quentin demanded, not lowering his rifle. "Peace," Elias replied simply. "Contrary to what you might think, I'm not here for revenge. Your brother accused us of his murder," Genny pointed out. "Victor was always quick to judgment, especially when angry. It was his greatest flaw." Elias dismounted slowly, signaling his men to stay mounted. "The sheriff found the real killer 2 days ago, one of our own ranch hands who had a grudge against Victor for firing him. He confessed to the whole thing." Quentin and Genny exchanged skeptical glances. "Why are you telling us this in person?" Quentin asked. "And with an armed escort," Elias sighed, suddenly looking older than his years. "Victor's death has given me perspective. We've been fighting over land and water for so long, I'd forgotten why we came to this territory in the first place. My brother and I wanted to build something that would last, something we could be proud of." He gestured toward the ranch around them. "Not so different from what you two are doing here." Genny stepped forward, still wary but willing to listen. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Simmons?" "A truce. Your water rights are yours, the court settled that fairly. In return, I'm hoping we might find ways to cooperate rather than compete. This territory is harsh enough without making enemies of our neighbors." Quentin lowered his rifle slightly. "Why the change of heart?" "Burying your only brother changes a man," Elias replied simply. "Makes you reconsider what's truly important." There was genuine grief in his voice that even Quentin couldn't dismiss. After a long moment, he fully lowered his rifle. "We're willing to live peacefully if you are, Simmons. But understand this, if you ever threaten Genny or this ranch again, there won't be a second chance." Elias nodded, extending his hand. "Understood." After a moment's hesitation, Quentin shook it, sealing their tentative truce. As Elias and his men rode away, Genny slipped her arm around Quentin's waist. "Do you believe him?" "Not entirely," he admitted. "But it's a start, and it means we can focus on building our future without constantly looking over our shoulders." "Speaking of building," Genny said with a smile, "now that we're officially married, I thought we might revisit those house plans my father drew up. The cabin is lovely, but if our family grows—" Quentin's eyes widened slightly. "Are you saying—" She laughed at his expression. "Not yet. But someday, I hope. Don't you?" He pulled her into his arms, his heart full to bursting. "Nothing would make me happier than building a family with you, Genny Irving." As they stood together in the yard of their ranch, the morning sun warming their faces and the desert blooming around them, Genny thought back to that devastating day when she had lost everything to the fire. She remembered Quentin's words as he lifted her trunk from the ashes. "We will recover." And they had. Not just recovered, but flourished, finding in each other the strength and love to build something far more precious than anything the flames had taken. In the years that followed, the Irving Ranch prospered. They expanded the house according to Jonathan Osborne's original plans, creating a comfortable home with plenty of room for the children they hoped for. Their herd grew, as did their reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle. The truce with Elias Simmons held, eventually evolving into a cautious business relationship that benefited both ranches. The territory itself was changing too, with more settlers arriving each year, gradually transforming the wild frontier into established communities. In the spring of 1880, almost 2 years after they met, Genny gave birth to their first child, a son they named Jonathan, after her father. As Quentin held his newborn son, looking down at Genny with eyes full of love and wonder, he knew that the journey that had brought him to Nogales, to that burning house and the brave woman who refused to be defeated by disaster, had been the most important of his life. "Thank you," he whispered to his wife. "For what?" she asked, smiling tiredly. "For everything. For our home, our son, our life together." "We built it together," she reminded him, echoing the words he had spoken so long ago. "And we'll keep building one day at a time." Outside their window, the desert bloomed once again, a testament to the resilience and beauty that could flourish even in the harshest conditions, much like the love that had grown between a drifting cowboy and a determined ranch woman, forged in fire and stronger for having weathered the flames.